Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?
Covering both sides of the big issues with the analysis you trust on News Radio 1040 WHO.
This is so interesting to me that a lot of folks have been working away from the office, distance learning, distance working, yet it is still possible, many are saying, that a toxic workplace can be created. I thought that maybe that was just a brick and mortar thing, but workplace culture expert Joel Patterson is back on the Lamarca Law Group Newsmakers line to talk about this. Joel, what are you seeing? Is it possible to create a toxic workplace even though there's not a brick and mortar workplace?
Yeah, I think surprisingly, I think it can actually get worse. If you went into COVID with an environment that wasn't very conducive to happy employees, you're likely experiencing even worse situation now, simply because people don't have the ability to communicate as well. You think about things like gossip. Gossip is a really easy example, and any toxic work environment most likely has gossip running rampant. And the anonymity with Zoom, with a Slack channel, with email, it's kind of like social media, how people will say anything. I think that it just exacerbates the problem that people feel comfortable actually saying things that they may not say if they were face-to-face with someone. So that's just going to create an even more toxic environment.
That is such a great point, Joel. And now, of course, I'm wondering how a company, an office can handle that. The first thought that just pops to my mind listening to your answer is maybe just having some times where people are getting together virtually and just talking things through without an agenda. As you're thinking this through, what's a good way for an office to handle something like this?
Yeah, it's kind of just going back to the same old building blocks that you need to pay attention to when you're building a culture. Certainly getting people engaged outside of work, whether that's still over a Zoom call or even a phone call, is important. Hopefully, as things start to open up, we're able to get people in the office at least a day or two a week to combat some of those issues. But really, it comes down to the basics: communication, consistent communication at that, so that you're telling everybody what's going on, you're open and honest. But more importantly, in this situation, you got to make sure that you're listening as part of that communication as well. Make sure that your people have an outlet to be able to tell you, hey, I'm feeling this way. Because you've got other things like the political situation and the election.
Yeah.
You've got social justice. You've got people doing remote learning with their kids. All of these things are creating additional stress on people and additional areas for others to kind of pick at them about. And people know that, and they get apprehensive about it. And so if you're being open and giving them that channel to communicate with you, that's going to go a long way to making sure that you avoid these pitfalls.
Joel, another great point that you're making, you always inspire great thoughts when you and I talk back and forth about this stuff, is how people are bolder when they're not face-to-face. That really is a problem, and you just brought this up where you're talking about right now you've got the election going on, you've got the rioting and the protests and the hard feelings that are going on around the country. And normally face-to-face, maybe that mutes some of the more harsh statements that people would make in an office. But when you're not face-to-face, people do get bolder when they're not communicating and they're face-to-face, they're online, don't they?
They absolutely do. And another thing that really leads to this is just a lack of communication. So Let me clarify that a little bit, in that, you send an email and there's no tone filter or font to make sure that, you're saying it in a way that you're actually intending it to. And somebody that isn't necessarily getting as much feedback as they're used to when they're in person, they could definitely interpret that a different way than what you intended. And that just snowballs into something bigger than what you probably intended it for it to be. And that's got to be addressed as well. So there's no perfect answer for this, but there's all kinds of ways to fall into the trap. So you've got to just be aware. This is simple stuff, but it's not easy. You've got to be intentional about it to make sure that you're following through. And it's like I was saying before, you got to be consistent. If you're not being consistent about whatever tack that you take, it's almost a double negative, because you're acting like you're doing something about it. You recognize the problem, but you don't have the willingness to see it through.
Joel, the other thing that I'm worried about is we're all aware as employees that businesses are under a great deal of economic stress, and we worry about our own future as people working for a company. Should a company take steps to talk to the employees about how things are going for the company during 2020?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this was an important point when we first stepped into COVID because nobody really knew what was going to happen. Well, here's the reality. We still don't really know. And so letting your people know, be a little vulnerable with them. Let them know that you don't have all the answers right now, but that you are doing absolutely everything that you can to find the answers, to make sure that you're protecting them, that you're continuing to have a place for them to work. And you're going to gain respect just by taking that level of vulnerability to your communication. People, it's not like Gordon Gekko where you've got to be yelling at everybody and that's how you lead. That's just not the way it works anymore. You've got to be real and honest and transparent.
But greed is good. Nah, Joel wouldn't agree with that either. Workplace culture expert Joel Patterson. Joel, thanks very much for joining me. That is great insight for commentator. You bet.